Well, welcome back to the ICSDP's podcast. It really is a place, really. I don't even know if it's a podcast, but it's a place just to kind of hang out and have conversation about things that matter and really focusing on the SDGs. And we've had a few guests on already, and we're going to have plenty more over the next little while. So do stay tuned, do listen, do subscribe, and please share with some of your family and not just your closest friends. How about just share it with everybody you know? These are important conversations to have, and thanks for joining us. Ruby Dagher she's an international development professional. She is a consultant. She's a researcher. She's an author with a new book coming out that we're definitely going to have to talk about. She's also a professor at the University of Ottawa, and I'm going to say an expert in all things development related. Ruby, thanks for joining me here on this podcast. It's a conversation. Thanks for
Thank you for me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You're welcome. And hey, listen, I've heard rumor that the word delusion makes it into the title of your new book. I'm loving it already.
Yes. The new book is looking at decentralization. There's a lot of research already being done on decentralization that has been done on decentralization, and quite a few books that have been written about it. And all of them show sort of a mixed record of results. The difference for us is that we look at it from sort of the underpinning assumptions, beliefs, presumptions, theories, and we actually check and see whether these pan out everywhere around the world or not. And then looking at what the recommendations are that are often put out in response to some of the hiccups or some of the problems associated with decentralization. And then that decentralization in all of its forms, in all of its types, and in all of its levels. And we used, I think, about 53 cases from all around the world except Australia. And we show that even the recommendations are anchored in these beliefs, assumptions, presumptions, and theories that really are not applicable. And that's why the word delusion comes in. It's because we're believing in something that is not likely going to happen. And we keep forcing the same medication down certain people's throats, if I could say it that way.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Tell me, do you just not like Australians, or was there a
No, there
strategic reason
wasn't.
for that?
Yeah, there wasn't a really good assessment of decentralization in Australia. There were some reports written about sort of decentralization in the Indigenous communities, but that in and of itself, it's a clash of two different cultures and a history. And it was very complex. And we didn't find that there were enough articles or enough research that was done at a level that was important and that we could kind of rely on.
Ruby, you know what? I'm getting goosebumps as you're saying that. And here's the reason why, because boy, does it buoy my spirits when I know that people like you are involved in these types of studies and books, because I'm sure some of our listeners probably know that, but the fact that you're taking that kind of care and concern, how many 53 other
53 case studies.
pieces that you're looking at to create this book, I don't know. It makes me smile knowing that we've got the pros in place. How's that?
Thank you. That's very kind of you. And it's kind because a lot of the times when we question these really important assumptions, and one of the biggest thing we do in the book is sort of argue for the disassociation between decentralization and democratization, in a sense that recently they've kind of been decentralization has been co-opted into the democratization agenda, and kind of talking about why that might not be the best way of doing it, and looking at how it's become such that agenda has kind of underpinned everything that's happened, or that guides the decentralization agenda.
Sure.
And so asking for that separation, that disassociation, has ruffled a lot of feathers.
Right. Interesting. Well, I want to come back to your phrase mixed record of results. And because I think that's a big, nice, beautiful little segue into ICSDP and the hope there for what this commission is really going to be all about. But I would love to learn a little bit more about you. I mean, why development? How did you slide into it? Did you fall into it? Is this a volunteer trip that you took 30? Can you give us a little bit of context for our listeners?
Sure. I didn't volunteer. I might have slid into it, though, I have to say. So I'm an immigrant to Canada. I came when I was 14. I came at the end of the Civil War in Lebanon. So I'm Lebanese of origin, Lebanese Canadian. And when I went to school here, I was really interested in sort of understanding the dynamics and why was Canada so different from Lebanon. And then I remember going to university. I did my undergrad at McGill. I did it in political science and economics, and trying to take as many courses as possible to sort of better understand it. And I couldn't really figure it out because a lot of it was sort of taught or given from the perspective of the Western world and the Western experiences, which really didn't explain much about what Lebanon was going through, unless I decided to sort of ignore all that complexity and say this is the solution. And so these questions sort of kept bugging me. And then I decided to do a master's, and then looking at I was in Ottawa at the time. I had moved back to Ottawa, and then looking at the options for masters that I had in Ottawa, because I wasn't very mobile, I came across program of public policy administration, but at that time it had an emphasis on development. That was at Carleton University, the School of Public Policy and Administration. And the courses that were given, I fell in love with the courses because it kind of explained to me some of the dynamics of the world rather than just the theories of how the world is supposed to be organized. And it kind of delved into some of the political economy stuff. It delved into some of the power relations. It mixed economics with political science, with public administration, with state structures and institutions. And that was the eye-opening part for me. And as part of the program, a lot of us ended up going and working at what used to be CEDA, the Canadian International Development Agency. And so I actually worked at CEDA for about 6 or 7 years. And I was mostly stationed or associated with the Middle East desk. And that was a huge eye-opener for me, huge eye-opener into what the reality actually is, but also how it's so easy to fall into silos of understandings and silos of expecting or seeing or believing that certain things should look the same way because of. And also this idea of Canada has a lot to offer to the world, which it does, but that omnipresence that kind of doesn't allow us to see other opportunities or other successes that come from other parts of the world. And so that led me to my PhD, which was along the same lines, but was mostly focused on conflict and state legitimacy after conflict. So throughout my studies, the key driving force does this make sense in other parts of the world?
Mm.
Is this applicable? What underpins this way of thinking, and does this make sense everywhere? And so that sort of carried through throughout my research, throughout my teaching, and throughout my work.
I love the phrase you used earlier in response, the dynamics of the world, and isn't it? I don't know, development. I mean, there's so many things I think we could put into this list, but that image of I don't know, I'm going to go a little cliche, but the older white male, maybe with a hairline like mine, holding a clipboard and walking into a rural community somewhere in northeastern Cambodia in Stung Treng and saying, "Hey, we're here."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The arrogance of that and not being able to listen. And I love, Ruby, your comment about seeing, oh, wow, hang on, this isn't just about the Western lens. And to me, that's just remarkable.
And it's something that I see a lot in my teaching. I see a lot of students coming from other parts of the world that always assume that what is here is better than what they have, and therefore it should be like here. And I think it's I think your image is bang on for in several cases, but also one of the other things that we're starting to engage with, and I try to engage with in my work as well, is that idea that the educational systems throughout the world have perpetuated this idea of sort of there is this way of doing things and this is the best way of doing things. And so that idea of really understanding the base or understanding, the totality of what's happening, the entirety of what's happening, I think that's the one that's missing. And so when my students come from other parts of the world, and then all parts of the world mostly, you find that they're not as critical or as knowledgeable about the totality of things, and they're more sort of interested in specifics here and there.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I mean, for me as the philosopher, I mean, I'm interested in challenging the lens, or as Nietzsche said, to testing the idol, right? And I think there's a long line of idols in this field. It seems to me that we do need to be testing, and some probably need to be shattered entirely, and we kind of need to start over, which I think brings us maybe to the ICSDP and this idea that there is an independent commission that is going to be able to if things move forward as we hope, to look at this through a different lens. The experts that are going to be around the table will bring a new perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of help us understand maybe why now is a good time?
Well, I mean, the world is going through so much right now. And so there's a lot of discussions around the crisis related to development with the closure of US aid, with a lot of governments cutting their budget related to development. But I think there's also this understanding that, an arising understanding, in my opinion, that maybe what we thought was right is not necessarily fully right. And we're starting to question, at least some of us are starting to question things at the base. And when we look at the SDGs, it's really hard to say that they're bad, because who wouldn't want zero poverty? Who wouldn't want gender equality? I mean, who wouldn't want to protect the environment? So they seem laudable and they're amazing, and especially the way that they're sort of explained. Well, they're described initially, but then when you actually look at how they were put together, when you actually look at the indicators that are being used to measure them, then you can start to tease out certain ideologies or certain parts of an ideology that then makes you question whether these SDGs are actually viable, yes or no. And then on top of that, you start to see now with what's happening in the world, you're starting to see sort of the influence of foreign policy and the influence of politics in certain countries and their impact on the rest of the SDGs. So just maybe one quick example, and I think this was really highlighted a lot during the COVID era of our time, was the fact that, a political decision making in powerful Western countries mostly influenced the success of a lot of the SDGs, because there was this decision to tap into vaccines. It was this decision to stop and close borders. There was this decision to limit access to certain benefits, internationally speaking. And you could tell that quite a few of those were for the benefits of the country in question, but had this ripple effect to really impact a lot of lives around the world. And so this idea that the foreign policy, and especially in democratic countries, I would argue, where you have to run for elections, you have to win elections. And a lot of people, I would say, especially in the Western world, are not fully aware of the impact of the Western world and other countries around the world. This decision-making and the need to be reelected and the need to win elections, I think, has a significant impact on the universality of the SDG goals and on the idea that we're all we're in this all together, and that they apply everywhere, and we all have to kind of work together to get through this and to actually achieve the results.
So you use the word laudable. Love that. So it's kind of a hope so. It's a reach beyond our grasp almost, if I can go reference a Barrett Browning poem, But somewhere along the way, and pretty early on, it sounds like, that was lost. So I think, or at least maybe that's sort of what I'm hearing, or we lost our way to some degree. And I wonder if this is the question that I have, but I'd love to hear you tease this out as well. Is there a difference between, say, political will or lack of political will and political limitations? Does that make sense?
Yes, there is a difference between them. But interestingly enough, when you look at the SDGs, and especially if you look at the actors that were involved in the development of the SDGs, the political will and the political limitations were kind of working together.
Right.
In a sense, where when you look at how the SDGs were put together, there was no political will to question, the extreme capitalist system that we have at the international level. And then there was sort of political interests to continue this kind of system that was there. And that, if I could just kind of think of it from the economic growth SDG to the environment SDG, and this is where we see that there was a real contradiction between economic growth, the SDG, and then the inclusion one as well, thinking of it from an inclusivity perspective and having all the rights that you deserve. And so what we see is that the perception, or the way that it was brought forward initially, even from the initial design or initial thought process, was more about how can we keep the system intact but make it better, when others were arguing for, actually, let's change the system a little bit more, or a lot more, depending, again, on who these actors were. And so there was that sort of political will, but political interest as well, to limit the power of and influence and contribution of certain actors that were perhaps going against the political interests and against the political wills of certain powerful entities, and saying that this is not how it's supposed to be designed. And so when you see it from that perspective, you know that there was already sort of, if we visualize it, there was already a box that was presented, and you could not
Right.
step outside that box. And so how do we improve this box? And those who
So we're
wanted,
okay with change, but only so much,
yes,
and only if it's kind of defined by our starting
exactly.
point, which is
Yeah,
kind of deeply problematic, really,
very
on so
problematic.
many levels, on so
So
many
many
levels.
levels. And so we see people, for example, who started working on the environment SDG, who, or goal, the environment plus climate change plus like all the other goals that are related to that, the water and so forth. These people who initially started working on those were ones, there were many of them who really wanted a big change in the capitalistic system. That it wasn't just about technology, that it wasn't just about green energy, but that we had to rethink certain things that we were doing and that we had to put caps on certain things. And so these people with time, research shows us, and this is something that we write in the book as well, the book that I have on evaluating the SDGs that I co-authored, with time, they actually started getting kicked out of that group and being replaced by people who promoted green energy, promoted sort of the status quo, but with a few changes here and there. And so when you see that happen, and it's the same thing when it was the group that was talking about inclusive growth, they were talking about inclusion from sort of increasing social services, less about sort of growth in GDP, more concentrated about sort of equitable growth. And thinking about, for example, there were some that were thinking about the impact of trademarks, whether it be on technology, on even vaccines, or any medication, the pharmaceutical industry, and the impact of these trademarks on that inclusive growth and what it means for inclusive growth and minimizing the inequalities, the level of inequalities. And those, again, were slowly pushed out of these teams and replaced by others, or their contributions were not taken into consideration. So I think going back to your original question, David, I think it's both. It's that political will and also the political limitation, because they had to respond to certain groups of people. And more or less what we see is that the definition of the SDGs and how they're perceived and understood continue the current system that we have and continue basically the if I could be as crude to say, but the domination of certain groups of people, but also certain countries. And the way that the SDGs are designed does not really question that domination in
Well, ironically, Ruby, ironically to me, here what I'm hearing is this: they're actually feeding into a sense of global insecurity, which is really troubling, right? Do you know where I'm going with that?
yeah.
Like you say, the status quo, we start out laudable, isn't it wonderful, reach beyond our grasp. Who wouldn't, like as you said so beautifully, who wouldn't agree with the SDGs and say, yes, of course, this agenda is where we need to be. But if we chisel away at it and chip away at the core over a very short period of time, what's going to happen in the longer sort of forward-looking sense? I mean, it becomes a false sense of hope almost.
It does. And I think it's also anchored in this sort of fear of questioning what everybody has taken for granted and has taken as a given
Fair
and
enough.
has been perceived to be superior. And so there are people questioning and there are people working on alternatives, but it's that sort of either lack of willingness or lack of comfort or fear of actually engaging with this other way of doing development or thinking about development. And, it is also, interestingly enough, when you sort of think about when the SDGs started to be developed, is we went from the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, to the SDGs. There wasn't enough research that was done on the successes of the MDGs to say whether they were good or bad. And the evaluations that were done were very limited and didn't even question the ethos of a lot of these goals, and also the bigger picture of a lot of these goals. And it was mostly about, well, it wasn't done enough, or we have to do more of this. But, the essence of them wasn't really questioned. And then straight into the SDGs at a time when a lot of people started criticizing this dominant way of thinking about development, at a time when people really started questioning neoliberalism, the global economy. So it was a way for some, and you would see this in some of the reports that were issued afterwards, some of it is referenced in our book, it was a way for some to say, we need to rescue this system. We need to make sure that it's rescued because it's great and we need to keep it. How do we rescue it? Rather than say, should we think about things from a different perspective? And so that's why even in the book, when we look at it, we actually assess all the indicators and we talk about the viability of the indicators, but we'll also talk about whether the indicators actually make sense when it comes to questions of development and if these indicators are even possible given all of these goals together and what one can do to the other and how one can undermine the other.
Yeah, it's as if maybe the committee/committees should have been spending a little more time on the footnotes.
Absolutely.
That's what it sounds like to me, you know? So, hey, and I'm just going to do a little plug for you. The book, by the way, folks, is The Delusion of Decentralization, and it's coming soon to a theater near you, I understand, and
Yes.
Published by Routledge. Is that that right?
Yes, we're in the
You're
final
hoping.
stages,
Oh, amazing.
so we're hoping that
That's pretty exciting. So do you have an actual on the shelf date?
not yet.
Not quite.
Not quite yet. That takes
Excellent.
a
Well,
while.
we will. Yeah, it takes a while. It's a difficult world. I've actually made a documentary film, and I remember when I finished my degree, my undergrad years back, I just having this newfound respect for anyone who had gotten through any kind of degree, right? That kind of commitment and passion to finish a book, a film, a work of art. It's a lot.
It's a labor of love. And I've been researching decentralization, I would say actually from 2016. So it's not something that is new to me.
So you're not hoping to get rich off the franchise rights on this book? Is that what we're saying?
Not at all.
Well, listen, so speaking, I mean, I have so many questions and really looking forward to continuing this conversation with the ICSDP and so on. But it almost sounds to me, before maybe we can wrap by talking more about the commission itself and what it means to you personally, but also hopefully, globally. Did we need 17? Might it have been better if it had been 2 or 3? Like, these are a little more manageable, or would that just deflate that egomaniacal balloon that's floating out there somewhere? I don't know. I'm trying to have a bit of fun with a very big question.
It's a very good question. And I would say, 17 is way too much in a sense where for the government of Canada, for example, and with Statistics Canada that we have here, 17 is doable. These indicators are doable. But most countries around the world, I find it extremely hard to measure these indicators. And then the problem that happens, and we've kind of looked at this as well, is that when you have so many indicators to measure, then you can't measure your own indicators. So if you have a different way of thinking, or you have a program that looks at things from a different perspective, or you want to put money in something that is not within what is required for these indicators, then you have, especially if either you're still under sort of an IMF program, International Monetary Fund program, you're cutting, whatever your situation is, many of them either don't have the capacity or the funding to be able to then either get all the information for the existing indicators because they're a lot of indicators, or to come up with their own and look at their own depending on what programs they want and what they want to do. So I think that sort of, from that perspective, if you actually want success along these indicators and you want to be able to properly measure them and say, we were able to do this and this and this along the 17 indicators, 17 goals, that's really problematic because you won't be able to actually get all the information along the 17 goals.
I don't know if this makes sense at all, but it sounds like an ideological undermining of the actual initiative in the first place. 17 goals. Wow. Okay. And I think it's really interesting. You say Canada, it's doable. That's amazing. That's a challenge and an affirmation, it seems to me. But when you look at the indicators, like it's kind of mind blowing because it presupposes capacity and resources and so many things that so many countries just, as you said, don't have access to. And I just wonder about it wasn't set up to succeed almost as I'm listening.
Well, I mean, initially the critiques were too many goals, too many indicators and objectives. And then the answer was, well, we need to dream because at least we have a path
Nice.
forward.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
And that's good. But again, if you have a pathway forward and you're dreaming, but it's not necessarily possible, then what you have to do is you have to go back and look at it, if you visualize it, is what are you building on? What piles are you building on, and what ground are you building on? So if your piles are being dug into a swampy area without hitting the actual stable parts of the earth, then you could dream for all you want. The problem with then dreaming is, well, we knew it wasn't going to be perfect anyway, but then the question shouldn't be, or we shouldn't get to a point to say we knew it wasn't going to be perfect. You can dream, but is it actually something that is doable? And what is the harm that could be done by following it from this perspective? And therefore, what are you not doing? And so thinking about these unintended consequences. And so you can dream as much as you want. And you can say, at least it's a guide. It's going to help us. And we've had a few successes here and there because of some of the indicators. And there have been, but
Right.
development.
And we need to celebrate those.
And we do. But the development is not about the sort of the surface wins. It's about thinking about the overall systems and structures that are put in place. And it's to think about issues and the SDGs, unfortunately, they hyper focus on what's wrong in the country to the detriment of thinking about the interconnectivity between countries in the region, outside the region, in the international economic system. The only one that truly, I would say, does that is the one related to climate change, where we're kind of thinking about the bigger picture. Some say, the 17, goal 17 also does that. But in effect, if you actually look at the indicators themselves and you assess what it actually means, it's usually about what's wrong over there. Development can't function if you only think about what's wrong over there. Because if development, as defined, is about everything, economics, politics, environment, social aspects, immigration, security, environment, all these things, then it cannot just be what's in the country. And it has to be more of a global understanding of all of the dynamics and the impact of these dynamics in the country.
Well,
That's what we're missing.
I love where this is going, and we're going to wrap in a few minutes, but I love that you've come back to your phrase, I think, earlier on, the dynamics of the world, right? Which is kind of what pulled you in the first place. And what I'm hearing is, where did the interdependence go? And why aren't we presupposing that when we go in? And I feel like saying, the ICSDP, how come it didn't exist before the 17 goals were, laid out? An independent commission that said, no, this is interdependent. This is not either or. This is a much more nuanced and complicated and paradoxical world that we're stepping into. And it's one of those classics too, to me. I've been working in development a long time, and, you can get somebody outside the boardroom to agree with you. But once they get into the boardroom, things potentially change. And when it comes to the vote and the potential lobbyists that you didn't account for, it's a different conversation. And I don't want to go too cynical here, because I'm a hopeful cynic. I really do still believe in these goals. But can you tell us a little bit about why this independent commission on sustainable development, wait for it, progress, is so important, right? It's not just about the SDGs. This is about moving it forward. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your involvement and why you're excited to be a part of it?
Well, I'm excited to be a part of it because I think it's the place where it's great minds coming together. In my opinion, I'm probably not one of these great minds. I'm super humbled to be around them, but it's that knowledge and that expertise, but also the idea that we actually have a space where we can independently, critically analyze these things. We can think about what it actually means. We can push certain questions further. One of the really important things about development, which we often forget, is that it's the tiny little sister of the other aspects of foreign policy, right? You have politics, economics, security, immigration, and whatnot. Aid and development initiatives are a tiny, tiny, tiny small part when it comes to sort of the global world, especially when it comes to how the Western world interacts with the rest of the world, the non-Western world. And so that this type of commission, I think, would be helpful in that it kind of would look at all of these interactions. I'm hoping we would be able to look at all these interactions, and we would be able to better understand, A, the reality of what's happening, but B, also coming up with independent solutions and suggestions that are not beholden to foreign policy, that are not beholden to power dynamics, and that can sort of guide, at least either guide action, but at the minimum, push conversations to move away from the halo effect of what I call the halo effect, which is the idea that, the Western world that's been helping and trying to do everything possible. And, we have the answers because our systems look at us and look at them. And so this idea that we have been doing so good and we've been so nice and we've given them money earned by our own taxpayers to do this and that. And, this and the halo effect that comes with that. And I'm hoping that in the commission we would undo this halo effect, and we would have the capacity to go further, dig deeper, push things further, and perhaps, and that's maybe a pie in the sky, I don't know, but perhaps start conversations about doing things differently, really differently, and not just adjusting within the box.
You know what came to mind? Oscar Wilde. The experience is the name we give to our mistakes. And this commission, to me, is about the reality of bringing our lived experience, these however many committees there are going to be, and experts, and there's a lot of them. And as you say, by the way, I really do think you are very much a part of this group, but hey, what do I know, right? No, seriously. And I'm thrilled to be having these conversations with people like yourself and Adam Snade and so many others. And again, a little quick shout out, as you're listening here, please don't forget to subscribe and share it with family and friends. This is an important conversation for so many reasons. This can change the way you see the world. I mean, talk about a new lens. This will definitely color the lens in a new way. And I think that's really, really remarkable. Yeah, this is about bringing a certain, I think, humility to the table. Isn't it, Ruby? About saying the commission this, so it's about transparency. It's about accountability. The ICSDP is about results and about the footnotes.
It's being humble enough to understand that we might not have been right all along, and that there might be better solutions that are out there, that even stepping outside this predetermined box might actually be a good idea, even though it's extremely scary. And I think that humility and being humble about that is actually what's necessary, because without being humble, without questioning, without having humility, there's very little learning that happens. It's only in the spaces that we are uncomfortable, where we start asking the real questions and the hard questions, that a lot of the learning happens. And especially, in my opinion, and given everything that I've been doing, it's questioning these underlying theories, assumptions, presumptions that we take for granted. And it's that humility and that willingness to go there and to feel that the discomfort and question things that we take or we value, that are near and dear to our hearts. And I think that's what we're hoping to do as well, is that humility, that questioning. And it's not because we believe in a certain thing that we think it's protected from all criticism or protected from all analysis and real analysis and assessment.
I love that you say we have to feel the discomfort. That's what a wonderful way to kind of wrap this up. But before we officially close, tell me a little bit about what you're doing with your students and a dev world and some of that social media that I've just started looking at. You're on you're on TikTok, for crying out loud. You're miles ahead of where I'm at. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Those are my
That's not
students.
you.
That is not me. Well, it's really rare to find people who can sort of look at the bigger system and position what's happening into the bigger system, and talking about not only activism and making some changes here and there, but situating it into the bigger picture. And one of the things that I make sure in my classes as I'm teaching is to help students, and in other work that I do, workshops and so forth, is to help people and students to situate what is happening into the bigger system. And to understand it, because when you silo things and you focus on something, you don't see the interaction with the rest of the aspects. And so one of the things that came out of several of my classes was sort of a request by the students to um, this way of thinking further, to discuss things in ways that is accessible to other people, and to always situate things in the bigger picture and try to understand things from a bigger perspective. And so we thought about how we could do this, and ADEV is analyzing development, but the objective is really to look at things from a different perspective related to development. So really reimagining our understanding of development, kind of better understanding all of these dynamics and the bigger picture and the implications of the bigger picture, not only on the system in general, but on the people in many parts of the world. And so we do we do podcasts, we do events. We post reels, we do quotes, we bring voices from people from around the world that are not, Western voices, because there's the space to hear these voices is smaller and smaller for people
Mm.
from the non-Western world. And so we try to kind of bring quotes and put quotes up so people can see the work that is being done by others. And really, we want to push the thinking a little bit further and really reimagine what we understand about development.
I love it. Reimagination. How can that not be hopeful, right? I mean, we're not there yet. We got a long way to go. So many conversations and conversations to have, books to read and so on, conferences to attend. I love a line that you used earlier. Get us outside, I think was what you were saying, of our silos of understanding. And it sounds like your students get that. And that buoys my spirits. That's an amazing thing. So look for Ruby and her students on Instagram and TikTok. I may have to open an account. How crazy is that,
Well,
Ruby?
we're also on Facebook and on
Okay,
YouTube.
good to know. Excellent. No, that's great to know. Well, listen, thanks for joining me here today to chat about this new independent commission called the ICSDP. Check it out. It's online, theicsdp.org. You can contact us there and sign up for a newsletter. Ruby, what a pleasure. And I feel like I say this every time, barely scratching the surface. I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thank you for having me.